Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
There is a strange paradox hidden inside the twin flame journey, one that many people only understand after years of emotional highs, painful separations, and endless questions. Union rarely happens when two people are desperately trying to be together. In fact, the opposite is often true. The deeper truth is this. The moment when the runner stops running and the chaser stops chasing is often the moment when the entire dynamic begins to change.
But why?
Why would a connection that feels so intense, so magnetic, seem to move further away the more someone tries to hold on to it? To understand this, we first have to talk about one of the most misunderstood dynamics in the twin flame journey: the runner and the chaser. If you have ever experienced this connection, you probably know exactly what this feels like. One person seems to run away from the intensity of the bond. The other feels compelled to move closer, to talk, to resolve things, to restore the connection. The more one pulls away, the more the other tries to reach out. It becomes an emotional dance that feels almost impossible to escape. But here's the question most people never stop to ask. What would happen if both people simply stopped playing their roles?
What if the runner stopped running?
And what if the chaser stopped chasing? At first glance, this idea sounds almost impossible. After all, the chaser often believes that if they stop trying, the connection will disappear forever. And the runner often believes that if they stop running, they might lose their sense of independence or emotional safety. So both people continue their roles, sometimes for years. The runner creates distance. The chaser tries to close that distance. But the more they repeat these roles, the stronger the pattern becomes. And over time, the connection becomes trapped inside this cycle. Imagine two magnets facing each other. If you push them together from the wrong side, they repel each other. The harder you push, the stronger the resistance becomes. But if you simply release the pressure and allow the magnets to realign naturally, something interesting happens. They begin to move into balance on their own. This is very similar to what happens in the runner-chaser dynamic. When the chaser pushes harder, the runner often feels overwhelmed and pulls away even further. When the runner pulls away, the chaser feels panic and tries to close the gap. And so the cycle continues. Not because either person wants to hurt the other, but because both are reacting to deep emotional triggers. For the chaser, the connection often awakens a powerful fear of abandonment. They may feel that if they stop reaching out, they will lose the connection completely. So they try to fix things. They try to talk. They try to explain. They try to hold the relationship together. But for the runner, the connection awakens a different kind of fear. The intensity of the bond can feel overwhelming. It can feel like their entire emotional world is being exposed. Old wounds begin to surface. Unresolved feelings come to the surface. And instead of facing these emotions directly, the runner's instinct is often to create distance. Distance feels safer. Silence feels easier. Avoidance feels like control. But what both people often fail to see is that the dynamic itself is feeding the problem. The more one runs, the more the other chases. And the more one chases, the more the other runs. It is not simply a relationship issue. It is an energetic pattern. And like any energetic pattern, it can only change when the energy behind it changes. This is where the real transformation begins. Because there comes a moment in many twin flame journeys when something shifts. Usually it does not happen all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. The chaser becomes exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. They begin to realize that no amount of chasing seems to create real stability in the connection. Every time they try to pull the runner closer, the runner eventually pulls away again. And eventually a new question appears in their mind. What if the answer is not to chase harder? What if the real answer is to stop chasing entirely? At the same time, something interesting often begins to happen on the runner's side as well. When the runner expects the chaser to pursue them, the dynamic feels predictable. They know the chaser will reach out. They know the chaser will try to fix things. They know the chaser will try to close the distance. But when the chaser suddenly becomes quiet, when the messages stop, when the emotional pressure disappears, the runner experiences something unfamiliar.
Space.
And inside that space, something begins to change. Because the runner is no longer reacting to pursuit. Instead, they're left alone with their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own questions. Sometimes this is the first time the runner truly begins to reflect on the connection. Not because someone forced them to, but because the energy around them has shifted. And this is the moment when the entire dynamic begins to loosen its grip. The chase begins to dissolve. The roles begin to blur. And something much deeper starts to emerge. Because the twin flame journey was never really about running or chasing. Those roles are simply part of the awakening process. They reveal wounds that both people need to heal. They reveal fears that both people need to face. But they are not the final destination. The real purpose of the journey is transformation. And transformation rarely happens while people are stuck inside unconscious patterns. It begins when those patterns stop. When the runner no longer feels the need to escape. When the chaser no longer feels the need to pursue. When both people start turning their attention inward instead of toward each other. This is when the energy begins to rebalance. Not through force. Not through control. But through awareness. And once that balance begins to return, something remarkable becomes possible. For the first time, the connection is no longer built on fear. It is no longer fueled by the anxiety of losing each other. Instead, it begins to evolve into something calmer, something clearer, something far more powerful. But the most surprising part of this transformation is this. Union does not begin when the chase intensifies. Union begins when the chase ends. When both souls finally stop trying to control the connection. They create the space for something much deeper to unfold. And that is where the real journey begins. Before the runner stops running. And before the chaser stops chasing. There is something important we must understand. The runner and the chaser are not random roles. They are not simply personality traits. They are energetic responses triggered by the intensity of the twin flame connection. And this is why the dynamic can feel so confusing. Because neither person consciously decides to become the runner or the chaser. It simply happens. Almost automatically. When two twin flames first meet, the connection often feels electric. There is an instant recognition that is difficult to explain with logic. Many people describe it as feeling like they have known the other person forever. Conversations flow effortlessly. Eye contact feels deeper than usual. And there is often an overwhelming sense that something important has just entered their life. At first, everything may feel beautiful, exciting, even magical. But as the connection deepens, something else begins to happen beneath the surface. Old emotional wounds begin to rise. Fears that were once buried start to reveal themselves. And this is where the dynamic of the runner and the chaser begins to form. Because the twin flame connection does something very unusual. It acts like a mirror. Not a mirror that reflects physical appearance, but a mirror that reflects the deepest parts of the soul. Everything that has been hidden, everything that has been avoided, everything that still needs healing, suddenly becomes visible. And for many people, this level of emotional exposure can feel overwhelming. Some people respond to this intensity by moving closer. Others respond by pulling away. This is how the roles begin. The chaser is usually the person who becomes more aware of the emotional depth of the connection. First, they feel the bond strongly. They sense its meaning. They may even feel that the relationship is spiritually significant. Because of this awareness, they often want to nurture the connection. They want to talk about it, understand it, protect it. They may reach out more often, try to resolve misunderstandings quickly, or attempt to maintain closeness whenever distance appears. From the outside, it may look like the chaser is simply more emotionally invested. But the truth is more complex. Often, the chaser is responding to a deep internal fear. A fear of losing something that feels incredibly important. Sometimes this fear is connected to past experiences of abandonment or rejection. So when the runner begins to pull away, the chaser feels an urgent need to restore the connection. They may send messages, try to explain their feelings, ask for clarity, or attempt to fix the relationship. In their mind, they are trying to save something meaningful. But from the runner's perspective, the experience can feel very different. The runner is usually the person who feels overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of the connection. It is not that they do not feel the bond. In fact, many runners feel it just as strongly as the chaser. But instead of moving closer, their instinct is to create distance.
Why?
Because the connection begins to touch parts of their emotional world that they may not be ready to
Face.
The mirror effect of the twin flame relationship reveals fears, insecurities, and unresolved wounds. And for someone who is not yet prepared to process those feelings, the experience can feel threatening. Running becomes a form of emotional self-protection. It allows the runner to regain a sense of control. Distance creates safety. Silence creates space. Avoidance temporarily reduces the emotional intensity. But here is the paradox. The runner does not truly escape the connection by creating distance. The energy of the bond remains, even if they try to ignore it, even if they distract themselves with work, friends, or other relationships, even if they convince themselves that walking away was the logical decision. Something about the connection continues to linger in their awareness. At the same time, the chaser often interprets the runner's behavior in a painful way. They may believe the runner simply does not care, or that the feelings were never real. This misunderstanding can create even more emotional tension. The chaser pushes harder to understand. The runner withdraws further to protect their emotional boundaries. And the cycle becomes stronger. But what most people do not realize is that the runner and the chaser are not actually opposites. They are reflections of the same underlying fear. Both individuals are reacting to the intensity of the same connection. The chaser fears losing it. The runner fears being consumed by it. One moves closer. The other moves away. Yet both are responding to the same energetic mirror. Imagine standing in front of a powerful spotlight. If the light is too bright, one person might instinctively step closer to understand it. Another might step back because the brightness feels overwhelming. But the light itself is the same. This is what the twin flame connection does. It shines a light on the deepest parts of both individuals. And, depending on their emotional readiness, each person reacts differently. For the chaser, the connection may awaken a powerful desire for union. For the runner, the connection may awaken a powerful need for independence. Neither response is wrong. They are simply different stages of growth. However, problems arise when both people become trapped in these roles. When the chaser believes their purpose is to pursue endlessly, and when the runner believes their only option is to escape. Because the truth is this: the roles of runner and chaser were never meant to be permanent. They are temporary responses during the awakening process. They exist to reveal the emotional patterns that both people must eventually heal. The chaser learns to release attachment and develop inner stability. The runner learns to face emotional vulnerability and open their heart. And when those lessons begin to integrate, something interesting happens. The roles begin to dissolve. The chaser no longer feels the need to chase. The runner no longer feels the need to run. And when that moment arrives, the dynamic that once seemed impossible to escape suddenly loses its power. But reaching that point requires awareness. It requires both individuals to recognize the pattern they are inside. Because until someone becomes conscious of the runner-chaser cycle, they will continue repeating it over and over again, not because they want to, but because unconscious patterns always repeat themselves. So the real question is not, why does the runner run?
Or,
why does the chaser chase? The deeper question is this: what happens when both people finally see the pattern clearly and decide to step out of it? Because the moment someone stops playing their role, the entire energetic structure of the connection begins to change. And that is where the next phase of the twin flame journey truly begins. If the runner-chaser dynamic creates so much confusion, pain, and emotional turbulence. An obvious question arises. Why does this cycle exist at all? Why would a connection that is supposed to be deeply spiritual, even transformative, begin with such imbalance? At first glance, the pattern can seem almost cruel. One person runs, the other chases. One person seeks distance, the other seeks closeness. And both individuals often feel misunderstood by the other. But when we look deeper, the runner-chaser dynamic begins to reveal something important. It is not a punishment. It is not a mistake. It is a mechanism of awakening. The twin flame connection has a very specific purpose. It accelerates personal transformation. Unlike many ordinary relationships, which may develop slowly and gradually over time, twin flame connections often move with intense speed. The emotional depth appears almost immediately. The recognition feels instant, and the impact on both individuals can be profound. But this rapid awakening also means that unresolved emotional patterns surface much faster than usual. In most relationships, people are able to hide certain fears or wounds for a long time. They may avoid difficult emotions. They may keep certain defenses in place. They may even build entire identities around avoiding vulnerability. But the twin flame connection disrupts those defenses. It acts like a powerful mirror, reflecting the inner world of both people. Everything that has been hidden begins to rise to the surface. And when this happens, people respond in the ways they have learned throughout their lives. Some people respond to emotional intensity by moving closer. Others respond by creating distance. These responses are not random. They are shaped by past experiences, early relationships, childhood conditioning, and personal coping mechanisms developed over time. For example, someone who grew up feeling emotionally abandoned may develop a deep sensitivity to distance in relationships. When someone they care about pulls away, even slightly, it can trigger a powerful fear of loss. That fear then drives the impulse to restore connection as quickly as possible. This is often the psychological root of the chaser energy. The chaser is not simply pursuing the other person. They are often trying to protect themselves from the feeling of being left behind. On the other side, someone who grew up in an environment where emotional closeness felt overwhelming or unpredictable may develop a different coping mechanism. Instead of seeking closeness, they learn to create space whenever emotions become intense. Distance becomes a form of safety. Control becomes a way to manage vulnerability. This is often the root of the runner energy. The runner is not necessarily rejecting the connection. They are protecting themselves from emotional exposure that feels too intense to handle. What makes the twin flame dynamic so powerful is that these two patterns meet each other directly. The chaser's fear of abandonment meets the runner's fear of emotional overwhelm. Each person unintentionally activates the other's deepest triggers. And this is why the dynamic can feel so intense. It is not just about the relationship itself. It is about the emotional patterns both people carry within them. When the runner creates distance, the chaser's fear of abandonment becomes activated. When the chaser pursues more intensely, the runner's fear of emotional engulfment becomes activated. And so the cycle begins. One person moves away. The other moves closer. One person creates silence. The other tries to break it. Each reaction strengthens the other, like two gears turning inside the same machine. But here is the deeper truth behind this pattern. The runner-chaser dynamic is not designed to last forever. It exists to bring these emotional wounds into awareness. Because wounds that remain hidden cannot be healed. The twin flame connection forces both individuals to confront aspects of themselves they may have avoided for years. For the chaser, the journey often involves learning to find emotional stability within themselves. They begin to realize that their sense of peace cannot depend entirely on another person's presence. They learn self-worth, self-trust, and emotional independence. For the runner, the journey often involves learning to face vulnerability rather than escape from it. They begin to recognize that emotional closeness is not the same as losing control. They learn openness, honesty, and emotional courage. Both individuals are being guided toward balance. But this balance cannot appear while the roles of runner and chaser remain active. As long as one person is chasing and the other is running, the energy of the connection stays locked inside the same pattern. It is similar to a pendulum swinging back and forth. The more it swings in one direction, the stronger the movement in the opposite direction becomes. The chaser pushes forward. The runner pulls away. The runner creates distance. The chaser moves closer again. And the pendulum continues swinging. But every pendulum eventually slows down. Not because someone forces it to stop, but because the energy behind the motion begins to settle. In the twin flame journey, this settling usually begins when one person starts to become aware of the pattern. They begin to notice that their reactions are not bringing the peace they desire. The chaser may realize that constant pursuit only creates more distance. The runner may realize that constant escape does not truly remove the emotional connection. And this realization begins to create space for change. Because once awareness appears, unconscious reactions begin to weaken. Instead of reacting automatically, both individuals start to reflect. They start asking deeper questions. Why do I feel the need to chase? Why do I feel the need to run? What am I actually afraid of? And these questions open the door to transformation. Because the moment someone begins looking inward rather than blaming the other person, the dynamic starts to shift. The chaser begins to focus on their own healing. The runner begins to question their avoidance. And slowly, the emotional charge that once fueled the cycle begins to soften. This is the beginning of the end of the runner-chaser phase. Not because the connection disappears, but because the purpose of the dynamic has been fulfilled. The mirror has revealed what needed to be seen. The fears have been brought into awareness. The wounds have begun the process of healing. And when that healing continues to deepen, something remarkable happens. The roles that once defined the relationship start to lose their meaning. The chaser no longer feels the urge to pursue. The runner no longer feels the need to escape. Instead of reacting from fear, both individuals begin responding from awareness. And this shift changes everything. Because when the runner-chaser cycle dissolves, the energy of the connection is finally free to evolve into something new. Something calmer. Something more balanced. Something much closer to the possibility of union. But the transition into that phase requires one crucial step. Someone must first stop feeding the cycle. Someone must first step out of the pattern. And that step often begins in the most unexpected way. Not through chasing harder. Not through running farther. But through something much quieter. Through the simple, powerful act of letting go of the role itself. And that is where the next stage of the journey begins. At some point in the twin flame journey, a quiet but powerful shift begins to take place. It does not happen suddenly. It is not usually dramatic. In fact, from the outside, it may appear almost invisible. But internally, for the person who has spent so long in the role of the chaser, it feels like a profound turning point. Because after months, or sometimes even years of trying to hold the connection together, the chaser begins to feel something they may not have allowed themselves to feel before. Exhaustion. Not just physical exhaustion, but emotional exhaustion. They begin to realize that no matter how many messages they send, no matter how many conversations they try to initiate, and no matter how much love they offer, the pattern between them and the runner does not seem to change. Every moment of closeness is followed by distance. Every moment of hope is followed by confusion. Every time they feel the connection returning, it eventually slips away again. At first, the chaser believes the solution is simple. Try harder. Be more patient. Be more understanding. Communicate better. But over time, something inside them begins to question this approach. A quiet realization starts to form. What if chasing is actually part of the problem? This is not an easy realization to accept. Because for the chaser, the instinct to pursue often comes from a place of deep love and commitment. They believe they are protecting the connection. They believe they are fighting for something meaningful. They believe that if they stop reaching out, the relationship might disappear forever. So the idea of stopping can feel terrifying. It can feel like giving up. It can feel like surrendering something that once felt incredibly important. But the truth is more subtle than that. Stopping the chase is not the same as abandoning the connection. It is about abandoning the role that has kept the dynamic trapped in imbalance. To understand this shift, imagine holding a rope in a game of tug-of-war. For a long time, the chaser has been pulling with all their strength, trying to bring the other person closer. But the runner keeps pulling in the opposite direction. The harder the chaser pulls, the stronger the resistance becomes. Eventually, the chaser begins to realize something important. As long as both people keep pulling, the tension will never disappear. The rope will remain tight. The struggle will continue. But what happens if one person simply lets go? At first, letting go feels frightening. There is a moment of uncertainty, a moment of silence. But something unexpected happens when the tension disappears. The struggle ends. This is very similar to what happens when the chaser stops chasing. The energy that once fueled the cycle begins to dissolve. But this transformation does not happen overnight. For the chaser, stopping the chase is often a deeply emotional process. There may be moments of doubt, moments where they feel tempted to reach out again, moments where they question whether they made the right decision. Because chasing has often become more than just an action. It has become an identity. The chaser may have spent so much time focusing on the runner that they lost connection with their own inner world. Their emotional energy has been directed outward. Their attention has been focused on the relationship. Their sense of stability has depended on the runner's responses. So when they finally stop chasing, something unusual happens. All that attention suddenly turns inward. And at first, this can feel uncomfortable. Because now they must face the emotions that were hidden beneath the pursuit. Loneliness,
grief,
uncertainty, questions about self-worth, questions about whether the connection was ever truly mutual. But this stage is also the beginning of something powerful. Because when the chaser stops chasing, they create space for self-discovery. Instead of constantly monitoring the runner's behavior, they begin to explore their own needs, their own dreams, their own healing. They begin asking new questions. Who am I when I am not trying to hold this connection together? What does my life look like when I focus on my own growth? Slowly, their energy begins to shift. They start investing time in themselves, in their passions, in their friendships, in their personal development. They begin to rebuild their emotional foundation. And as this transformation unfolds, something remarkable begins to happen. The energy that once felt desperate becomes calmer. The attachment that once felt overwhelming becomes softer. The constant need for reassurance begins to fade. The chaser starts to discover something they may not have realized before. Their sense of completeness does not depend on another person. They are capable of creating peace within themselves. And this realization is one of the most important turning points in the twin flame journey. Because the chaser is no longer chasing out of fear. They are no longer trying to control the outcome. They're simply living their life, growing, healing, becoming stronger within themselves. And this internal shift has a powerful energetic effect. The twin flame connection is deeply sensitive to energy. It responds not just to actions, but to emotional states. When the chaser was pursuing the runner, the energy of the connection was filled with urgency and pressure. Even if the chaser's intentions were loving, the energy carried a sense of need. And that need often triggered the runner's instinct to create distance. But when the chaser stops chasing, the energy becomes different. There is no longer pressure. There is no longer pursuit. There is space,
calmness,
and a sense of independence. This change can be deeply surprising for the runner, because the dynamic they had grown accustomed to suddenly disappears. The messages stop. The emotional tension fades. The predictable cycle breaks. And this creates a new kind of silence in the connection. But this silence is not empty. It is full of possibility. Because for the first time, the relationship is no longer being driven by the chase. Instead, both individuals are given the opportunity to stand on their own emotional ground. The chaser is discovering their inner strength. The runner is experiencing the absence of pursuit. And in that space, something begins to rebalance. The roles that once defined the relationship start to dissolve. The chaser becomes someone who simply lives their truth. Someone who values themselves enough to stop chasing what is not freely given. And this transformation changes the entire energetic structure of the connection. Because when the chaser stops chasing, the runner is no longer running from pressure. They are simply standing in the quiet space that remains. And sometimes in that quiet space, a new awareness begins to grow. An awareness that the connection still exists. But now it exists without the noise of pursuit. Without the urgency of fear. Without the roles that once kept both people trapped in the same endless cycle. And this is the moment when the dynamic begins to move toward its next stage. Not through force. Not through persuasion. But through the quiet power of balance beginning to return. For a long time in the twin flame journey, it can feel as though the entire dynamic revolves around the runner's distance. The runner pulls away. The runner becomes silent. The runner creates space. From the perspective of the chaser, this behavior can feel confusing and painful. It can appear as if the runner simply does not care, or as if the connection never meant as much to them. But the truth is far more complex. In many cases, the runner is not running because they feel nothing. They are running because they feel too much. The emotional intensity of the connection touches parts of their inner world that they may not be prepared to face. Old fears begin to surface. Vulnerabilities they once managed to avoid suddenly become visible. And when that emotional exposure becomes overwhelming, their instinct is to create distance. Running becomes a form of protection. But something important begins to change once the chaser stops chasing. When the pursuit disappears, the runner enters a completely different emotional landscape. For a long time, the runner has been reacting to the pressure of the chase. Every message, every attempt at reconnection, every emotional conversation may have felt like something they needed to escape. Distance gave them breathing room. Silence gave them control. Avoidance allowed them to maintain emotional boundaries. But when the chaser steps back and the pursuit ends, the dynamic loses its familiar structure. The runner expects messages that no longer arrive. They expect attempts to reconnect that never appear. They expect the cycle to continue, but instead, they encounter something unfamiliar. Stillness. And within that stillness, something begins to shift. At first, the runner may feel relief. The absence of pressure can feel calming. There are no difficult conversations waiting in their inbox. No emotional expectations demanding immediate responses. For a moment, it may feel like freedom. But as time passes, the silence begins to take on a different quality. Because the runner realizes something important. The chaser is no longer holding the connection together. And that realization can create a strange sense of emptiness. For the first time, the runner is no longer reacting to pursuit. Instead, they are alone with their own thoughts about the connection. This is often when deeper reflection begins. Without the emotional tension of the chase, the runner starts to see the relationship from a new perspective. They may begin to ask themselves questions they previously avoided. Why did I feel the need to run? Why did the connection feel so overwhelming? What was I actually afraid of? These questions do not always appear immediately. For some runners, it takes time before the reflection begins. But the silence created by the absence of pursuit often becomes the space where awareness grows. Because when someone is no longer running from something, they finally have the opportunity to look at it. The runner may begin to notice that the connection still lingers in their mind. Memories appear unexpectedly. Certain conversations replay in their thoughts. Moments they once tried to dismiss begin to feel more meaningful. And slowly, the emotional distance they once relied on starts to feel less comfortable than it did before. This stage can be deeply confusing for the runner, because they may realize that the connection did not disappear when they ran away. In fact, the silence has made it more visible. When the chaser was pursuing them, it was easy to focus on the pressure of the situation. They could blame the tension on the other person's persistence. But now that the pursuit is gone, the runner must face a different reality. the connection still exists. Not as pressure, not as obligation, but as a quiet presence within their awareness. And this is often the beginning of an internal shift. The runner starts to recognize that their instinct to run may have been less about the other person, and more about their own fears. Fear of vulnerability, fear of emotional exposure, fear of losing control of their carefully constructed sense of independence. These fears do not disappear overnight, but once they become visible, they begin to lose their unconscious power. The runner may start reflecting on their past experiences with relationships. They may notice patterns of avoidance they had never fully acknowledged before. Moments where they distanced themselves whenever emotional intimacy deepened. Situations where they chose independence over vulnerability. The twin flame connection simply amplified those patterns. It brought them to the surface with an intensity that could no longer be ignored. And this is where the runner's transformation begins. Not through force, not through persuasion, but through self-awareness. The runner slowly begins to understand that running did not actually protect them from emotional
depth.
It only delayed the moment when they would need to face it. They may begin to explore their emotions more honestly, to reflect on what the connection truly meant to them, to question whether distance was really the solution they once believed it to be. For some runners, this stage awakens a new sense of curiosity. Instead of viewing the connection as something overwhelming, they begin to see it as something meaningful, not something that threatens their independence, but something that invites emotional growth. At the same time, they may begin to notice the transformation happening on the other side. The chaser, who once seemed desperate to maintain the connection, is no longer chasing. They are living their life, growing, moving forward. And this change can be surprisingly powerful, because the runner now sees the chaser in a different light, not as someone trying to pull them closer, but as someone who has become grounded in themselves. This new dynamic removes the pressure that once triggered the runner's instinct to escape. Instead, it creates a space where both individuals stand independently. And in that space, the connection begins to transform. The runner no longer feels the need to run, not because someone convinced them to stay, but because the emotional environment has changed. The chase is gone. The pressure is gone. What remains is a quiet awareness that the connection still exists. And for the first time, the runner has the freedom to explore that awareness without fear. This is the moment when the runner's journey begins to mirror the chaser's earlier transformation. Just as the chaser learned to release attachment, the runner begins to learn emotional openness. Just as the chaser turned inward to discover their own strength, the runner begins to turn inward to understand their own fears. Both individuals are evolving, not through confrontation, but through reflection. And when both people reach the stage, when the chaser has stopped chasing and the runner has stopped running, the dynamic that once seemed impossible to escape begins to dissolve. The roles fade away, the tension disappears, and something entirely new begins to emerge. Because when neither person is running and neither person is chasing, the energy of the connection finally has the space to return to balance. There is a moment in the twin flame journey that many people do not recognize at first. It is not dramatic. There are no fireworks, no sudden declarations, no clear announcement that something has changed. Instead, the shift is subtle, quiet, almost invisible. But energetically, it is one of the most important transitions in the entire journey. It is the moment when the energy between the runner and the chaser begins to balance. For a long time, the connection has been defined by movement. One person running, the other chasing. One person creating distance, the other trying to close that distance. This constant motion generates emotional turbulence. It creates anxiety, confusion, and instability. Both individuals feel pulled in opposite directions. But once the runner stops running and the chaser stops chasing, that movement begins to slow down. The emotional pendulum that once swung wildly between closeness and distance gradually starts to settle. And when the pendulum slows, something new becomes possible. Balance. To understand this shift, imagine standing in the middle of a lake during a storm. The water is constantly moving. Waves crash in every direction. It is difficult to see a reflection on the surface because the water never becomes still. This is what the runner-chaser dynamic feels like. The emotional waves never stop long enough for either person to see clearly. But when the storm passes, the lake begins to calm. The surface of the water slowly smooths out. And for the first time, the reflection becomes visible. The same thing happens energetically between twin flames. When the cycle of pursuit and escape ends, the emotional storm begins to fade. There is space for clarity, space for awareness, space for a completely different kind of connection to emerge. This balance does not mean that all emotions disappear. Both individuals may still feel the bond strongly. They may still think about each other. They may still wonder about the future of the connection. But the emotional urgency that once dominated the relationship is no longer present. Instead of reacting from fear, both people begin responding from a place of inner stability. The chaser, who once felt compelled to pursue the connection, now feels grounded in their own life. They are no longer waiting for messages. They are no longer measuring their happiness based on the runner's behavior. They have rediscovered their independence, their identity, their sense of self. At the same time, the runner, who once relied on distance to feel safe, begins to experience something unexpected: the absence of pressure. Without someone chasing them, the emotional intensity that once triggered their instinct to escape begins to soften. They are no longer defending themselves against perceived demands. They are simply observing the connection from a calmer emotional space. And in that calm space, something interesting begins to happen. The connection becomes easier to feel. Not overwhelming, not threatening, but quietly present. It is as if both individuals are standing on opposite sides of a bridge, no longer pulling against each other. Instead, they are simply observing the distance between them and slowly realizing that the bridge still exists. Balance in the twin flame connection is not about forcing both people into the same emotional state. It is about allowing each person to stand firmly within themselves. When the chaser stops chasing, they reclaim their personal power. When the runner stops running, they reclaim their emotional openness. Both individuals begin to operate from a place of wholeness rather than fear. This shift changes the energetic structure of the relationship in profound ways. Previously, the connection was driven by imbalance. The chaser carried more emotional awareness. The runner carried more emotional resistance. But once both people begin their inner transformation, that imbalance begins to dissolve. Each person starts doing their own inner work. Each person begins facing the fears that once controlled their behavior. And this mutual growth creates an energetic harmony that was impossible during the runner-chaser
phase.
The connection becomes quieter, more stable, more mature. Instead of dramatic emotional swings, there is a sense of peaceful awareness. The bond no longer feels like something that must be constantly defended or pursued. It simply exists, like a steady light that continues to glow even when no one is actively focusing on it. This stage can feel unfamiliar for both individuals. After spending so much time in emotional turbulence, the calm may seem strange at first. The chaser may wonder if they have truly let go. The runner may wonder why the connection still lingers in their mind. But what they are experiencing is not confusion. It is the early stage of energetic alignment. In the twin flame journey, union cannot occur while the energy remains imbalanced. If one person is chasing and the other is running, the connection is built on tension rather than harmony. Union requires something different. It requires both individuals to stand in their own emotional sovereignty, to choose connection not out of fear or dependency, but out of genuine alignment. This is why the balancing stage is so important. It is the foundation for everything that follows. Without balance, union becomes impossible. But with balance, the connection finally has the opportunity to evolve into something deeper, something healthier, something more authentic. During this stage, both individuals may begin noticing subtle changes in their thoughts and emotions. The chaser may feel a sense of gratitude for the growth they experience through the journey. The runner may begin to appreciate the depth of the connection they once avoided. Instead of seeing the relationship as a source of chaos, both people begin recognizing it as a catalyst for transformation. They see how much they have changed, how much they have healed, how much they have learned about themselves. And this recognition creates a new kind of respect between the two souls. Even if they're not physically together, the energetic bond feels more peaceful, more balanced, more natural. There is no longer a struggle for control, no attempt to force the connection in a specific direction. Both individuals are simply living their lives. And yet, the connection continues to exist quietly beneath the surface. This quiet presence is one of the most mysterious aspects of the twin flame journey, because even when the drama disappears, even when the chasing stops, even when the running ends, the bond remains. But now it exists in a completely different form, not as a storm, but as still water, not as a chase, but as awareness. And in that stillness, something powerful begins to prepare itself. Because once the energy between two twin flames becomes balanced, a new possibility begins to emerge. The possibility that the connection can move beyond the old roles entirely, beyond runner, beyond chaser, toward something much more profound, toward the stage where two individuals meet again, not from fear, but from wholeness. And that is where the next chapter of the journey begins. One of the most fascinating aspects of the twin flame journey is that the most important changes rarely happen in dramatic ways. There is usually no single moment when a voice announces, the runner-chaser dynamic has ended. Instead, the transformation happens quietly, gradually, almost like the slow turning of seasons. At first, the landscape looks the same, but little by little, the atmosphere begins to shift. This is exactly what happens when the runner-chaser cycle begins to dissolve. Both individuals may still be living their separate lives. They may not even be in contact. And yet something about the connection begins to feel different. The tension that once defined the relationship starts to fade. The emotional pressure disappears. And in its place, a calmer awareness begins to emerge. But because this shift is so subtle, many people fail to recognize it. They are still expecting dramatic signs. A sudden reunion, an emotional confession, a clear declaration that everything has changed. But the real signs are much quieter than that. One of the first signs that the dynamic has changed is emotional neutrality. For a long time, the connection may have triggered intense emotional reactions. Every message from the runner created excitement. Every period of silence created anxiety. The chaser's emotional state was deeply tied to the runner's behavior. But when the chasing stops and inner healing begins, something surprising happens. The emotional intensity softens. The chaser may still think about the runner. They may still care about them. But their emotional stability no longer depends on what the runner does or does not do. They wake up and focus on their own life, their work, their passions, their personal growth. If the runner appears again, they may welcome the conversation. But if the runner remains silent, the chaser no longer feels devastated. This emotional neutrality is one of the clearest signs that the chaser has truly stepped out of their old role. And this shift has a powerful energetic effect. Because when the chaser is no longer sending out the energy of pursuit, the entire structure of the dynamic changes. Another subtle sign appears on the runner's side. For a long time, the runner may have felt a strong urge to create distance whenever the connection became emotionally intense. Their instinct was to escape the pressure, to protect their sense of independence. But when the chase disappears, the runner may begin to feel something unexpected.
Curiosity.
Without the constant presence of pursuit, the connection no longer feels threatening. Instead of triggering their instinct to run, it begins to feel like something they can observe from a distance. They may start remembering conversations, moments of laughter, deep emotional exchanges they once tried to forget. And instead of feeling overwhelmed by those memories, they begin to see them in a different light. They begin to wonder what the connection really meant, why it affected them so deeply, why it still lingers in their thoughts. This curiosity is often the first sign that the runner is no longer operating from the same defensive patterns. The instinct to escape has softened. Reflection has begun to replace avoidance. A third sign of transformation appears in the energetic field between the two individuals. Even without direct communication, both people may sense that something has shifted. The emotional chaos that once surrounded the connection is gone. Instead of feeling pulled into dramatic emotional cycles, they experience a quiet awareness of each other. It is difficult to explain with logic, but many people describe it as a sense of calm recognition, almost as if both souls are acknowledging each other from a distance, without needing to chase, without needing to run. This stage can feel strange because it lacks the intensity that once defined the connection. Some people even mistake this calmness for emotional detachment. They may wonder if the bond has disappeared. But in reality, the opposite is happening. The connection is becoming healthier. For the first time, it is no longer fueled by fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of losing control. Instead, the connection begins to exist within a field of mutual emotional independence. Both individuals are living their own lives, growing, healing, becoming stronger within themselves. And this independence creates a completely different energetic environment. Because now, if the two individuals interact again, the interaction is no longer driven by emotional desperation. It is driven by curiosity and authenticity. The chaser no longer feels the need to hold the connection together. The runner no longer feels the need to escape it. Both individuals are simply present. This shift often produces another subtle sign, a sense of peace about the connection. For a long time, the twin flame journey may have felt like an unresolved puzzle. Questions filled the mind constantly. Why did this happen? Why did they run? Why did I chase? Will we ever reunite? But when the dynamic changes, those questions begin to lose their urgency. The need for answers fades. Instead of obsessing over the outcome, both individuals begin trusting the process. They accept that whatever is meant to unfold will unfold naturally. This peace does not mean they stop caring about each other. It means they stop trying to control the future. And when that need for control disappears, the connection finally has room to breathe. This stage also creates space for a new type of communication, if communication happens at all. If the runner reaches out, the chaser may respond calmly rather than emotionally. If the chaser speaks honestly, the runner may listen without feeling pressured. The conversations that once triggered defensive reactions now feel more relaxed, more natural, more human. But even if no communication occurs, the energetic change remains. Both individuals feel lighter, more centered, more connected to themselves. And this self-connection is the most important transformation of all. Because the twin flame journey was never meant to be about losing oneself in another person. It was meant to lead both individuals back to their own wholeness. The runner learns to face emotional vulnerability. The chaser learns to develop emotional independence. And when both of these lessons begin to integrate, the old dynamic loses its power. The runner-chaser cycle simply no longer has the energy required to sustain itself. Instead of two people reacting to each other's fears, there are now two individuals standing in their own emotional truth. And when two people reach that stage, something remarkable becomes possible. For the first time, the connection can evolve beyond the roles that once defined it. Beyond running, beyond chasing, towards something that neither person could experience before. A meeting between two souls who are no longer trying to complete each other, but who have already discovered their own completeness. And that is the moment when the twin flame journey begins moving toward its most profound stage. The stage where union becomes not just a possibility, but a natural consequence of inner balance. For much of the twin flame journey, everything seems to revolve around two identities: the runner and the chaser. One runs, one chases, one avoids, one pursues. These roles can feel so powerful that they begin to define the entire relationship. People start to identify themselves through these patterns. I am the chaser. They are the runner. The dynamic becomes a story that both individuals carry with them. But something remarkable begins to happen as the journey progresses. The roles slowly begin to lose their meaning. Not because someone forces the change, not because someone convinces the other to behave differently, but because both individuals begin to transform from within. This transformation often starts quietly. The chaser, after long periods of emotional growth, no longer feels the same urgency to pursue the connection. They still care. They still remember the bond. But the intense need to restore the relationship at any cost begins to dissolve. They realize something important. Their life does not stop just because the connection is uncertain. Their happiness does not depend entirely on another person's presence. They begin investing their energy into their own path, their work, their passions, their personal evolution. And slowly, the identity of the chaser fades away. They are no longer chasing anyone. They're simply living their life. At the same time, something shifts within the runner. The instinct to escape begins to weaken. For a long time, distance felt like the safest option. Avoidance felt like protection. But as the emotional pressure disappears and the runner begins reflecting on the connection from a calmer perspective, they start noticing something unexpected. Running no longer feels necessary. The connection does not feel like a threat anymore. Without someone chasing them, there is no longer a sense of urgency to escape. Instead of reacting defensively, the runner begins observing their feelings more honestly. They begin asking themselves deeper questions. Why did this connection affect me so strongly? Why did I feel the need to create distance? What was I really afraid of? These questions open the door to self-awareness. And with awareness comes change. The runner starts recognizing that their instinct to run was not truly about the other person. It was about their own emotional patterns, their fear of vulnerability, their discomfort with emotional exposure, their desire to maintain control over their inner world. But once these patterns become visible, they begin to lose their power. Running no longer feels like the only option. And gradually, the identity of the runner begins to fade as well. What remains when these roles disappear is something very different. Two individuals, no longer defined by fear-based reactions, no longer trapped in unconscious patterns. Instead, both people begin standing in their own emotional truth. This stage can feel unfamiliar. After spending so much time inside the runner-chaser dynamic, the absence of those roles may feel strange. For a long time, the connection was filled with emotional intensity, moments of closeness, moments of distance, moments of longing, moments of frustration. But now, something new emerges.
Calm, clarity, space.
The relationship no longer feels like a battlefield of opposing energies. It begins to feel like a quiet field where both individuals can stand without pressure, without expectations, without roles to perform. This is the moment when the twin flame connection begins to mature, not into something dramatic or chaotic, but into something stable, something authentic, something that allows both individuals to exist as complete human beings rather than emotional opposites. One of the most important realizations during this stage is that neither person was ever meant to remain a runner or a chaser forever. Those roles were part of the awakening process. They revealed hidden fears. They exposed emotional wounds. They forced both individuals to confront aspects of themselves they may have ignored for years. But once those lessons begin to integrate, the roles are no longer necessary. It is similar to a teacher guiding students through a difficult lesson. At first, the lesson may feel confusing and challenging. But once the students understand it, the struggle ends. They move forward with new knowledge. The twin flame journey works in a similar way. The runner learns emotional courage. The chaser learns emotional independence. And once both lessons are learned, the dynamic that once kept them apart begins to dissolve. What replaces it is not a new role. It is simply authenticity. Two people who are no longer reacting from fear. Two people who are no longer trying to control the connection. Two people who are simply being themselves. At this stage, the connection often feels very different from what it was before. There is no longer the same sense of urgency, no overwhelming emotional turbulence. Instead, there is a quiet recognition, an understanding that the bond between them still exists, but it no longer defines their entire emotional world. Both individuals have rediscovered their own center, their own identity, their own path, and because they are no longer searching for completion outside themselves, they are finally able to meet each other from a place of wholeness. This is one of the most profound shifts in the entire twin flame journey. For the first time, the connection is not built on imbalance. It is built on equality. Both individuals stand on equal emotional ground. Neither person is chasing. Neither person is running. Instead, they are simply present. And this presence creates a completely different kind of energy between them. An energy that is calm rather than chaotic, open rather than defensive, peaceful rather than dramatic. From this place, something remarkable becomes possible. Because when two individuals meet without the roles of runner and chaser, they are finally free to experience the connection as it was always meant to be, not as a cycle of pursuit and escape, but as a meeting of two souls who have both grown through the journey, two souls who have faced their fears, two souls who have learned to stand on their own. And when those two souls meet again, without roles, without pressure, without fear, something extraordinary can begin to unfold. A connection that once felt like a storm can transform into something much deeper. Something steady, something balanced, something capable of evolving into true union. But that final stage requires one more transformation. Because even after the roles disappear, the journey is not fully complete. There is still one final step that allows the connection to move from potential into reality. For a long time in the twin flame journey, the idea of union can feel like a distant dream. At the beginning, the connection may feel powerful and magical. The recognition between two souls can be so intense that it seems inevitable they will end up together. But then the runner-chaser dynamic begins. Distance appears. Misunderstandings grow. The relationship becomes filled with emotional turbulence. During this stage, union often feels impossible. One person wants closeness while the other pulls away. One person tries to hold the connection together while the other struggles with vulnerability. The imbalance creates tension, and that tension prevents true union from forming. But as the journey progresses and both individuals begin their inner transformation, something remarkable starts to happen. The conditions that once made union impossible slowly begin to disappear. This does not happen through force. It does not happen because one person convinces the other to change. It happens because both individuals evolve. Union in the twin flame journey is not simply about two people deciding to be in a relationship. It is about two people reaching a level of inner balance where the connection can exist without fear, control, or emotional dependency. And this is why union cannot occur during the runner-chaser phase. During that stage, both individuals are still reacting to their wounds. The chaser is reacting to the fear of abandonment. The runner is reacting to the fear of emotional exposure. As long as those fears dominate the connection, the relationship cannot stabilize. But once both individuals begin healing those fears, the entire energetic structure changes. The chaser learns to find peace within themselves. They no longer chase love as something that must be secured or protected. Instead, they begin to embody self-worth. They understand that their value does not depend on someone else choosing them. At the same time, the runner learns something equally important. They begin to recognize that emotional vulnerability is not a threat. Opening their heart does not mean losing themselves. Closeness does not mean surrendering their independence. These realizations transform the way both individuals approach the connection. Instead of reacting from fear, they begin responding from awareness. This shift is what makes union possible, because for the first time, the connection is no longer driven by imbalance. Both individuals stand on equal emotional ground. Neither person is trying to control the outcome. Neither person is running away from the intensity. Instead, both people are simply present. They are aware of the connection. but they are not dependent on it for their sense of identity or stability. And this creates a very different kind of energy between them. The energy of union is calm. It is grounded. It is free from the desperation that wants to find the chaser and the avoidance that wants to find the runner. Imagine two people standing in a quiet room. In the past, they may have been pulling in opposite directions, one trying to leave, the other trying to hold them back. But now neither person is pulling. They're simply standing there, looking at each other, not from fear, but from clarity. This is the energetic environment where union becomes possible. Because now, the connection is no longer about filling emotional gaps. It is about sharing presence. Union is not about two incomplete people finding completion in each other. It is about two whole individuals choosing to connect. And that choice carries a completely different vibration. When union becomes possible, communication between the two individuals often changes as well. Conversations feel more relaxed, more honest, more open. There is no longer a sense of emotional urgency behind every word. Both individuals are able to listen without becoming defensive. They are able to express themselves without fear of being rejected or overwhelmed. This type of communication is one of the clearest signs that the connection has evolved beyond the runner-chaser dynamic. But even then, union does not always appear instantly. Sometimes there is still a period of adjustment. Both individuals may need time to integrate the personal growth they have experienced. They may need time to build trust again after the emotional turbulence of earlier stages. And that is completely natural. Because the twin flame journey is not a race toward reunion. It is a process of transformation. Union is simply the natural outcome when both individuals have completed the inner work required for the connection to exist in a healthy way. This is why union often arrives when people least expect it. It does not appear during the stage of intense chasing. It does not appear during moments of emotional chaos. Instead, it tends to appear when both individuals have reached a place of inner peace, when the chaser has released the need to pursue, when the runner has released the need to escape, when both people have rediscovered themselves as independent, whole human beings. At that moment, the connection can finally return without triggering the old patterns, because the people involved are no longer the same. They have grown, they have healed, they have transformed. And the relationship that emerges from this transformation is very different from the one that existed before. It is no longer driven by emotional survival. It is built on mutual respect, mutual awareness, mutual freedom. This is the true meaning of twin flame union, not the dramatic reunion that many people imagine, but the quiet meeting of two souls who have both completed their inner journey. Two souls who can now stand together without fear. Two souls who no longer need to run or chase, because they have finally discovered the balance within themselves. And when that balance exists within both individuals, the connection between them becomes something powerful, not something that creates chaos, but something that creates harmony, not something that demands control, but something that flows naturally. This is the stage where the twin flame connection becomes what it was always meant to be. Not a storm that disrupts life, but a light that illuminates it. And when that light appears between two people who are ready for it, the possibility of union is no longer just a dream. It becomes a living reality. Many people imagine twin flame union as a dramatic moment, a sudden reunion, an overwhelming wave of love. A cosmic recognition that changes everything in an instant. Movies, spiritual communities, and social media often describe union as something spectacular, a moment when two souls finally run toward each other and everything becomes perfect. But the deeper truth is far more subtle. Real twin flame union rarely arrives like lightning. It arrives like silence. Not the silence of distance or confusion, but the silence of inner peace. And that silence is the final sign that the long journey has finally transformed both souls. Because union is not the moment when two people finally find each other. Union is the moment when they no longer feel lost without each other. The end of the chase. In the earlier stages of the twin flame journey, The connection often feels intense and overwhelming. There is longing. There is fear. There is the deep desire to understand what this connection means. One person may chase. The other may run. This runner-chaser dynamic can repeat for years. The chaser feels the magnetic pull of the connection and tries to hold on. The runner feels the intensity and unconsciously retreats, often not understanding why the connection feels so powerful. From the outside, it can look chaotic, but beneath the chaos, something profound is happening. Each separation forces both souls to face their own wounds, abandonment fears, self-worth struggles, old emotional patterns. Twin flames are not meant to complete each other. They are meant to reveal what must be healed. And the runner-chaser dynamic only ends when that healing begins to happen. Not when they reunite, but when the need to chase disappears. The moment everything changes. There is a subtle turning point in the twin flame journey that many people overlook. It is not when the two people reconnect. It is when one of them finally lets go. Not in anger, not in exhaustion, but in deep acceptance. The chaser stops waiting for messages, stops analyzing every sign, stops building their life around the possibility of reunion. Instead, something unexpected happens. They start living fully again. They rediscover their passions. They reconnect with their own soul. And slowly, the emotional dependency dissolves. This moment is often called inner union. It is the stage where a person realizes, I do not need this connection to feel whole. And strangely, this is the moment when the energy of the entire connection begins to shift. Because twin flame union does not occur when two people desperately want each other. It occurs when both people become complete within themselves. Why union feels calm instead of intense. One of the biggest misconceptions about twin flame union is that it will feel overwhelming. But in reality, the closer two twin flames come to union, the calmer the connection becomes. The obsession fades. The emotional turbulence dissolves. And what remains is something much deeper. A quiet recognition. A sense of familiarity that no longer feels threatening. Think of it like the ocean. During the earlier stages of the journey, the waves are violent and unpredictable. But when the storm finally passes, the surface becomes still. The ocean has not lost its depth. It has simply returned to its natural state. This is what union feels like. Not fireworks, but peace. A story of unexpected reunion. There is a story often shared in spiritual circles about two people named Daniel and Mira. They met when they were in their early 20s. The connection between them was immediate and powerful. Conversations lasted until sunrise. They understood each other in ways that no one else ever had. But the intensity quickly became overwhelming. Daniel began to withdraw. Mira felt abandoned and tried harder to hold the connection together. Eventually, they separated. Years passed. Mira went through heartbreak, self-discovery, and healing. At some point, she stopped thinking of Daniel as the one she lost. Instead, she started focusing on her own life. She built a meaningful career. She developed deep friendships. And most importantly, she found peace within herself. Nearly 8 years later, she ran into Daniel by chance at a bookstore. There was no dramatic moment. No emotional collapse. Just a quiet conversation between two people who had changed. Daniel had also gone through his own transformation. They talked for an hour. Then they talked again, the next week. And slowly, something surprising happened. The connection that once felt overwhelming now felt simple. There was no pressure, no fear, no desperate need to define the relationship. They simply enjoyed being together. This is how union often begins. Not with intensity, but with ease. The paradox of twin flame union. The twin flame journey contains a deep paradox. The more someone tries to force union, the further it seems to move away. But the moment they truly release the need for it, the possibility of union becomes real.
Why?
Because union is not a reward. It is a reflection of inner alignment. When both individuals have done enough inner healing, the connection no longer triggers fear. It no longer exposes unresolved wounds. Instead, it becomes a space where both people can grow together. In this sense, union is not about destiny controlling two lives. It is about two people becoming ready at the same time. When union does not happen. Another truth that many people avoid discussing is this. Not every twin flame journey ends with physical union. And that does not mean the journey failed. Some twin flames meet only briefly. Others remain apart for an entire lifetime. But the purpose of the connection is still fulfilled if both individuals evolve spiritually. The twin flame path is ultimately a path of self-transformation. Union is a possibility, but awakening is the true destination, the final sign of union. There is one final sign that often appears before twin flame union becomes possible. It is surprisingly simple. Indifference, not coldness, not detachment, but a peaceful state where the connection no longer controls your emotions. You can think about the other person without pain. You can live your life fully, whether they return or not. At this stage, something remarkable has happened. The mirror between the two souls has completed its purpose. Both individuals have faced themselves. And because of that, they are no longer driven by fear or longing. They are guided by clarity. From this space, union becomes natural.
Not forced.
Not chased, but allowed. The true meaning of union. In the end, twin flame union is not about romance. It is about wholeness. It is about discovering that the love you were searching for in another person was always meant to awaken something inside you. And when that awakening happens, the connection transforms. Two people no longer come together out of need. They come together out of choice. And that is what makes twin flame unions so powerful. Not the intensity of the beginning, but the quiet strength of two souls who have finally learned how to stand on their own. And when they meet again, they are no longer looking for someone to complete them. They are simply ready to walk beside each other.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.